So, one of the controversial points in this season was Jesus. Like, there's a scene where you see Jesus, like, practicing his lines for the Sermon on the Mount, and he's, like, rephrasing things, and he's like, what's the line that he's working on?
I don't remember.
He's like,
You are the salt of the earth, was it?
if salt loses its salty taste, like, yeah. And he's like, oh, no, that's not right. and like, so people naturally are like, wait, would Jesus have needed to like work out the exact like syntax in his mind and like practice it and like revise it in advance? I'm not really buying it. But I don't know if it's like heretical either. And we also see Jesus, which I think is more defensible, maybe Jesus like asking Matthew to help him in like kind of editing and like arranging the Sermon on the Mount, which he's already composed most of. And I think that is more that like he's also teaching Matthew, and Matthew's also going to be the one to write this down in his gospel. So he's teaching him about preaching, and he's kind of drawing things forth from him. You don't get the sense that Jesus like really needs Matthew's help, but that he is like giving Matthew the privilege of being part of this process.
Yeah, totally.
And then it, of course, again, has this beautiful point where he is looking over the camp where the apostles have been staying, and he's thinking about the apostles when he's thinking about these different beatitudes. And he's thinking about his mother. And, we get, as each beatitude comes along, we get a picture of a different apostle or group of apostles. And, blessed are the peacemakers. We see Philip, making peace in an argument between the two Simons. And it's a really beautiful, moving scene. Matthew the actor who plays Matthew does a great job. What is it? Paris Patel, something like that. He does a great job in that. You can see his emotion. I think that Matthew's relationship with Jesus is really beautifully developed in this season in general.
Definitely.
But with regard to Jesus kind of like needing to figure things out in a kind of like a syntactical way rather than it all just kind of like flowing out of him.
Yeah.
Like they justify it a lot. They're also trying to justify the amount of time that Jesus spends like praying in the wilderness and stuff, that he is like deciding how he's going to communicate things to people. He is praying. He is, and this human knowledge of Jesus is a great mystery. So I don't know, Josh, I'm sure that you've studied these issues more than James or I have. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the way that they deal with Jesus's human knowledge in this season.
So ultimately what the church has taught on that point is that Jesus would have had access to all knowledge from his divine nature, if not from his human nature, although he also would have had experiential knowledge from his human nature. However, everything that he knew from his divine nature was present to his human nature, even if it wasn't from there. And so, for instance, where in St. Luke's gospel, it tells us that he grew.
Is that how it's interpreted when it says, like, there's some things the Father has not given to the Son to know?
Right,
like that.
Essentially. This is something that the church fathers wrestled with a great deal. And they ultimately, St. Gregory the Great talks about that, St. Ephrem as well, that there's a difference between what Jesus was permitted to manifest and that which was actually available to him. And that when he speaks of knowledge sort of not being his, or the Gospel of Luke speaks about him growing in wisdom and knowledge, that doesn't suggest that there was ever any actual ignorance at that point. So, it's not something that has been defined as a dogma, but it has been repeated as an ordinary teaching enough that it could be considered an infallible point. Having said that, there are certainly theologians who dispute it, but I think the grounds are there to assert that is an infallibly held teaching. And you see it across the church fathers, you see it in St. Thomas Aquinas, you see it in a lot of papal documents.
So it's not that Jesus would have been unconscious in his human nature of knowledge that he possessed in his divine nature.
Right. That would not have been the case. But I will say that I think the general sense that the Gospels present us of Jesus and of the way the Spirit works in the life of Jesus and the apostles doesn't jive to me with what the show presented to us in his preparation of the Sermon on the Mount. Like, for instance, in the Gospel of Luke, he says, chapter 12, verses 11 through 12, "And when they bring you before the synagogues and the rulers and the authorities, do not be anxious how or what you are to answer or what you are to say, for the Holy Spirit will teach you in that very hour what you ought to say." In John's Gospel,
Right.
chapter 12,
I thought of this
verse
as well.
49. Yeah, he says, "For I have not spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me has himself given me a commandment, what to say and what to speak." And so, there's that very clear sense that Jesus's words are not sort of carelessly given, or not things that he has to work out in that way.
Yeah.
And, I mean,
That's a really
that's
good
true
point.
of the
He
apostles.
is the Word made
How much
flesh,
more
right?
so of Christ? Exactly, yeah. So it's very strange that his apostles should not have to think about what they have to say, but he has to, rehearse for hours and hours and hours the Sermon on the Mount, and then have Matthew edit it with him. It's just very strange, and also because it doesn't. It seems just so modern to go about telling us a series of parables and sermons that way. I mean, this is a very much an oral based culture. They told their stories orally. They were repeated over and over. So many stories that teachers would have used would have been variations on common stories, and Jesus certainly does that. He's using a lot of imagery and themes that are already there in the Old Testament that are likely already, there are similar variants of them, and he's, in a way, subverting or expanding them to give his own teaching. And so, just the idea that he would have had to kind of process and think about things in the way that the show presents just really falls very flat to me, and doesn't seem to accord well with the general. And I mean, the Gospels don't lay this out for us in a precise way. So it's hard to say absolutely that could not have happened or that it was wrong. I mean, you could say that the Father gave him the words by means of these processes and by means of Matthew and whatever, but that's just it isn't the sense that one naturally gets from reading the Gospels.
Right.
Right, and it reminds you of, places in the first season where they said, Jesus talks himself about, somebody who, accidentally cutting himself while working, as a clumsy teenager. And of course he's being a little bit tongue-in-cheek maybe, but there's things where like the writers are clearly intending to show Jesus's humanity and the fact that he learned, as we're told in the gospel, that he learned, he learned from his parents. Although of course there is like plenty of Catholic folk traditions depicting like the infant Jesus like immediately just like speaking, and things like that. I think the intent is clearly to like try to grapple with something that's like a really great mystery and paradox. And I don't want to be too hard on them about it, but I do think that things like that do fall short,
Yeah. And this is perhaps related to some of the theological issues surrounding Mary, because, at the end of the day, it's the mystery of the incarnation, right? And Mary as the mother of God has, a central part to do with that.